I think if people are actually willing to see the video, have customized drills, slow things down for a couple and spend some time on things that actually are going to improve their specific form, that they can really start to ingrain that and then put it into practice in some of their easy swimming, or when they're doing pull and they don't have to worry about kicking like crazy and their heart rate and breathing getting out of control. They can focus on these things and slow things down. And I think that could be a good way of applying some of that visual that they have to actual feeling it in practice, because everybody's going to learn and it's going to click for them a little bit different from what I've seen in swimming.
Hello, and welcome to the July 12th edition of the TriDoc podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Sankoff, the TriDoc, an emergency physician, multiple Ironman finisher, triathlete, and triathlon coach, coming to you as always from beautiful, sunny Denver, Colorado. Well, this past weekend saw the contesting of the annual Roth Challenge, a incredibly popular and yet somehow still growing in its legend and popularity. The race is, of course, an Ironman distance event that has been taking place for, I believe, about 30 years now. And I could be overstating that. I think it might be between 20 and 30 years. And the race has just become just an explosion in terms of its legendary status. And this isn't due, I think, in part because of the way it is supported. There is just legendary crowd support on part of the bike course, and of course also because of the fact that it's just so darn fast. And we saw once again this past weekend, records fell as Magnus Ditlev and Anne Haug took on the course and just shattered the previous records that were held by Ditlev himself on the men's side and by Daniela Ryf on the women's side. What really impressed me was the fact that Magnus Ditlev did the 112-mile bike course in under 4 hours. That is really, really astonishing. That comes out to over 28 miles per hour, in case you're doing the math in your head. And Haug had an incredible run off of a really solid bike and was able to even go faster on the second half of the marathon than she did on the first. And for someone who is already just a stellar runner, still somewhat surprising that this woman with age continues to get better and better, and just an amazing spectacle. There are several bucket races that kind of exist on the Ironman circuit. The Escape from Alcatraz, which is another one of the previous kind of challenge events. It's now been wrapped up into the T100 series as part of the T100 event that takes place in San Francisco. It happened just about a month ago now. The Roth event, of course, Kona. Some people are saying that Roth has almost displaced Kona in terms of its bucket list ability because of the fact that Kona has now been split between the men and the women. I'm not totally sure I agree with that. I think that we need to let time pass before we can really determine whether or not Kona has lost its true luster. We'll see. But definitely Kona remains, in my mind, one of those races that everybody still wants to do. And there are others. What's on your list? I always think of things like Lanzarote as being kind of legendary in status. It's not necessarily one that I would kind of put in the same basket as things that everybody really wants to do, but it does retain that mystical kind of feature. Ironman Lake Placid is another one. And I know that there are others out there. Taupo, New Zealand is one. We're, of course, heading there for the World Championships here on the 70.3, but Ironman New Zealand, the full distance course, is one that has retained this mythical status. Penticton, another famous Ironman course that a lot of people who have done it sort of refer to whimsically. I'm one of those people who think of Penticton as being a bucket list kind of race. What's on your bucket list? I'd love to hear. And I think it makes for a really interesting conversation that can be had on the private Facebook group for the TriDoc podcast. If you're not a member, please do go look for that on Facebook. You can answer the 3 easy questions to gain admittance to that group, and let me know, what are your favorite races that either you have done or that remain on your bucket list to do before you consider your triathlon journey complete. I'd love to hear it, and I'm sure others out there who might be thinking of things that they want to do in their triathlon career would be interested in hearing what's on your list and particularly why. On the show today, we have a couple of interesting segments for you. On the medical mailbag, Coach Juliet Hochman will join me to discuss some recent literature that has been published that looks specifically at the biomechanics of runners and how or whether those biomechanics can influence running economy. Now, running economy, you will remember, is the ability of a runner to move forward burning the fewest calories possible. Well, is it possible that our biomechanics can play a role in how economical we are when we run? Recent research casts a light on this, and we are going to take a look at this and other papers that have come out on that subject, and that's coming out in just a short bit. After that, I'm going to have an interview with Mark Cullen. Mark is a coach. He's also the spouse of Jessica Cullen, a fairly new triathlon pro who was a guest on this podcast just a few episodes ago. And the two of them are the pair who co-host the Endurance Icons podcast. Well, Mark himself is a very accomplished coach and a very accomplished age group triathlete himself. And he shares his story of his journey into triathlon, how he's been successful, and what his philosophy is in coaching not just successful age group and professional triathletes, but how he manages coaching his own wife to success through the age group ranks and into the pros. That's going to be coming up in just a short while, and I'm sure you will enjoy that conversation as well. Before we get to all of that, I want to take my customary moment to acknowledge those of you who have decided that for the price of about a cup of coffee per month, you would like to support this podcast and in doing so become a Patreon supporter. To do that, you can head over to my Patreon website, which is www.patreon.com/TriDoc podcast. You can see the different levels that are available in order to support this podcast and keep this show going and improving all of the time. You can also, by doing so, get yourself access to bonus episodes that come out about every month or so. You can also take advantage of a gift that's available for those of you who subscribe at the $10 per month level. That is in the form of a pretty cool looking Boco TriDoc podcast running hat. But even if you don't subscribe at that level, I thank you just for considering and for taking a look. It's time again for the medical mailbag, the section of the program when Coach Juliet Hochman joins me and we answer questions that are submitted by listeners or, on occasion, questions that we've come up with on our own. Juliet, how are you today?
Fine, thanks. How are you? You know, the summer has suddenly taken off. Like, that feeling when you're behind a water skiing boat and you're just hanging on for dear life. I think that's where we are right now in this part of the season.
It's like you guys had I don't know if you did. I know I have a couple athletes in Portland and they just got walloped with a heat wave. And
we're still in it.
You are, right? Yeah, we had a pretty good stretch there. And I never complain about the hot weather because I have gotten to that point in my life where the cold just drives me crazy. And we're lucky here because when it gets hot, it's dry. So it's really never too uncomfortable. And I mean, I found myself last week doing 400 repeats on a track and it was like 100 degrees. And honestly, it really wasn't that bad because it's dry. So it doesn't feel so terrible. That said, it's broken.
We have the same thing in Oregon. I mean, it's hot and dry, which is much better than the humidity that you find on the East Coast. But we're still in it. I mean, through Tuesday night, it's temperatures to 100 every day, which again, it's fine. I mean, you're fine in your house if you're fortunate enough to have air conditioning. The trouble is, of course, if you have 2 or 3 workouts in a day, you just can't get up early enough to get them all in.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Yeah, so. Long runs, it's bad. And I mean, partly you kind of want to get some heat adaptation. You kind of want to train at a time when it's a little bit warm. But if you push it too hard or push it too far, then yeah, you really pay the price. We've had a break. This week, it's going to be a little bit more temperate. It's going to be only in the 80s, which is still very pleasant, but not quite as scorching. My son, Adam, is out for his long run with his cross-country team right now, and he is luxuriating in 70 degrees, so he's quite pleased. But Oregon coming up soon, so hopefully
it's less than 2 weeks
hopefully it'll break
away.
Before that.
Actually, just last night, I went online and bought myself one of those SPF 50 sun shirts because we are in for a long stretch of hot weather here, and I'm thinking if it is Oregon, and going to be on the race course all day, even after I finish and you finish. I got to have some sun protection. So,
yeah. Smart move. Well, what are we talking about today, Juliet, in the medical mailbag?
So interesting, we just talking about your son's long run. So we've been talking about this recently, and at this time of year, as athletes get closer and closer to a race or getting into higher volumes of run training, a lot of times a question comes up regarding running economy and how important it is, how important the connection is between running economy and your run biomechanics. I mean, I think we both have the experience where we look at both sort of Olympic level runners as well as our own age group runners, and we see things about their run or their stride that looks a little bit awkward, and we think, God, how can that be efficient, right? But then sometimes it isn't, and then they're going really fast, whether they're an age grouper or a world level athlete. And so we're really curious, and I know that you've been doing some research on this, on the connection between sort of flawless or near perfect run biomechanics and run economy. How much of a difference does it make, and how much should our age group athletes be working on changing the way they run to become more efficient and therefore faster?
It's a really good question. It's something that I have found myself wondering about for a long time, because when you watch a runner like Lionel Sanders, a great example, a guy who just looks like he has the worst biomechanics. He's got this hitch in his step, but he's so fast. And last year, I had the great pleasure, it was not under the best circumstances, where I couldn't race Boulder 70.3. And so I volunteered to ride one of the lead male athlete bikes. And I got a chance to ride behind Matt Sharp and Lionel Sanders as they raced the first loop of the course together. And it was really a contrast in studies, like Matt with this just beautiful fluid stride, and Lionel with this incredibly awkward,
choppy
gangly
workhorse.
kind of,
I know,
really,
yeah.
But both of them just running at this sensational speed. And I talked to Matt at length, because Matt and I are friends, and I don't know Lionel at all, but I talked to Matt about it afterwards, and he doesn't really have a great explanation for it. He just knows that Lionel is he says he's a beast, and he is. I mean, he's just this guy who can turn that choppy gait into this incredible speed. And running speed is a function of two things. It's a function of your VO2 max, which all of these athletes have in abundance, and running economy. So what is running economy? Running economy is essentially your ability to move burning the fewest amount of calories. That's kind of the best way to describe it. It's a measure that can only be done in a lab, really. But we can interpret it just kind of generally as saying, well, it's like your engine, right? It's your VO2 max is basically how much energy you can produce by consuming oxygen. And then your running economy is how well can you turn that energy into forward motion. And that latter piece is going to be your biomechanics. And it makes me wonder, does Lionel have this like just gigantic VO2 max, and then that compensates for poor running economy? Or has he adapted somehow for that crazy gait that he still is running economically? I don't know that he's ever been tested in a lab. He probably has. He probably could tell us those numbers. But I think moving away from the professionals, if we think just about age groupers, you and I, and the people we are talking to on this podcast, we can think about the things that influence biomechanics, and we could think about the things that we work with our athletes. And I have some papers that I looked at that generated this discussion. And we'll get to them in a second. But when you're working with athletes, Juliet, when you start with an athlete, when you look at them run, you spend a lot more time with your athletes. My athletes are almost all remote, but I do occasionally get video. I do occasionally get to work with them. Well, what are the things that you look at, and what are the things that you kind of harp on in terms of trying to help an athlete become more biomechanically correct? Correct's not really the best word, I guess, but more run more economically. Yeah, efficient, I think that's the best word. Yeah,
Right.
What are the things you look for?
Well, like you, I get video as well from athletes who just have a friend tape them and send it in. I think of it for a bunch of different things. One is just kind of overall 30,000 foot view, how smooth do they look, right? And that's that's sort of a couple different factors. First of all, are they very linear? Are they moving down the road in a way that takes up the least amount of space, if you will? Are their arms crossing over their midline, so their arms are coming out from side to side rather than being a nice, smooth kind of touch your pockets, elbows in type of motion? Is there too much hip motion? Particularly with women, we see a lot of rotation through the trunk, arms coming across the body, a lot of hip rotation. We see, is there too much vertical oscillation? Could they be moving forward, putting more energy linearly forward rather than up and down? What's happening with their foot strike? Are their feet, is one foot, sometimes it happens just on one foot and not the other. Is their foot strike quite even? Are they striking their feet right underneath their torso? Are they overreaching? Are they striking with their heel? Are they striking with their toe? Are they striking with their midfoot? So lots of different things. And it's not always the case that like the same 10 rules of running have to be applied to every runner, because runners have different anatomies and they're going to have different types of running. But can we bring athletes closer to sort of a general mean, and in terms of what we can expect, so that they are almost taking up less space as they're running through a tunnel? I guess that's the way that I think of it. What about you?
Yeah, that's good. I'm pretty much the same. I will add one other thing, and I know you're going to say you look at this too, because this is something that you can get with a metric, and this is something that measurables will give you in their data, and that's cadence. I always look for run cadence. That's kind of something my athletes know I'm always harping on. But the other things, especially now with a lot of the metrics, and I have not been a big fan of the stride, the thing that measures running power. I'm making air quotes here. But one of the things that the stride does well is it's really measuring vertical oscillation. That's really the main thing the stride does. But the Garmin does that as well. The Garmin FootPod, as well as the Garmin watches now, they all tend to measure this vertical oscillation. I think that's a big one. And like you, I look at foot strike, I look at knee height, I look at whether or not the person is running behind their body. I try to always sort of emphasize that. I want to see the foot coming up behind as opposed to reaching forward, all of those things. And then, like you said, the carriage of the body, you want to see them leaning a little bit forward as opposed to leaning back. And so I know that you will, just as I was, be very interested to hear the results of these studies, because these studies kind of blow up a lot of the things that I think you and I have traditionally looked for. Although I want to say that I don't think they'll necessarily change a ton. I think what they will do, these studies will re-emphasize a lot of the things that we look at, but they're also probably going to de-emphasize some of the things that you mentioned, because I was really surprised to find out that they're not as important. So the study that I came across, and that really sort of was the genesis of this topic, is a study that came out this year, actually just a couple of months ago. It's from the university in, you will be happy to hear this, Juliet, and Juliet will explain why she's going to be happy, but it's from the university in Maastricht in the Netherlands.
Maastricht.
Yeah. So why does that make you happy, Julie?
I spent 2 of the best years of my life, or 2.5, living in Amsterdam, and Maastricht is in the southern part of the Netherlands. Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
Glory days. Oh. Anyway, go ahead.
This is one of those segments that I really should publish the video, because you've been very animated, and this would be a good one. Anyways, so the title of this paper is The Relationship Between Running Biomechanics and Running Economy. And it's a systematic review and meta-analysis of observational studies. And now, clearly, this is the kind of thing you can really only do as an observational study. You cannot do a controlled trial where you tell one group to run a certain way and the other group to run another way. You can't do that. So instead, what you do is you just observe a whole bunch of people running, and you measure in a lab different metrics. And the things that they measured across these different studies were just a zillion different things. And it's really, really interesting. And the authors, one of the authors here, her name is Isabel Moore, and she's actually based in the UK. And she has written a bunch of studies on this subject. And she goes out of her way in the introduction to basically say, look, running performance is about 95% predicted by a combination of running economy and VO2 max. Principally being your running economy and being able to run at a large percentage of VO2 max. So all of the training we do, all of the fitness that we're working on acquiring is just being able to run at a larger percentage of our VO2 max for a longer period of time. But if we have good running economy, then that will allow us to have an even better performance.
Right.
Exactly.
Sure. Makes sense.
Okay. So that's basically what she's saying. And she also goes on to say that biomechanics can account for about 10% of individual variation in running economy. So it's not just that biomechanics are the only thing that determine running economy. There are other things involved. She doesn't go into exactly what they are, but she basically says if you can change your biomechanics, you can get about a 10% change in your running economy. So that's a pretty big impact on overall running performance. So what they wanted to know, what's optimal? What would be the best things? And they looked at a whole bunch of studies here. They pulled 51 different papers that comprised over 1,000 different runners. Unfortunately, the demographic breakdown is not great because, and that's not the fault of this paper, but rather the individual papers that were pulled in didn't do a great job of giving their demographics. So I can't tell you the ages, I can't tell you the sex breakdown of these runners, but so that's one limitation here. Nonetheless, the findings I think are super interesting. And I'm just going to cut right to the chase and just say that there were basically two things that were associated with better running economy. And those were cadence. So if you ran with a better, more optimal cadence, and we know that running economy tends to be best at a cadence of around 90 foot strikes per foot. So that means per minute. So that means you're running at 180 steps, both feet per minute. That tends to be associated with a better running economy and better running performance. And the other thing was lower vertical oscillation. So two of the things that you mentioned right off the bat, those were the things associated with better running economy. So less bounce, better cadence. And I will say that those two things kind of go together. If you're running with a higher cadence, you tend to go up and down less. It's kind of hard to bounce up and down if you're running with a higher cadence. A couple of things were associated with poorer running economy. Actually, there's only one thing associated with poorer running economy, and that was higher vertical oscillation. So the more you bounced up and down, the worse your running economy was. They had a couple of theorized reasons for that. One of them was a physiological theory. They felt, well, in order to go up and down, you have to recruit more muscles. And therefore, those muscles were going to have to work harder, burn more calories, and therefore you're burning more calories per step to go up higher per step. That was one possibility. The other possibility was a mechanical one, just saying that more work is necessary to move vertically against gravity, and then also coming down, you have to absorb that energy. And so there's just more wasted energy when you're going up and down more. So that was their reasoning for thinking that vertical oscillation was associated with poorer running economy. So here was the thing in the paper that I thought was most interesting, and that was that the following things, and I'll go slowly so that we can sort of talk about them individually, but the following things were not associated in any way with running economy. Contact time with the ground, which I think is interesting because if you're running at a higher cadence, your contact time should be lower. But it was interesting. Flight time. Again, if you're running with a higher cadence, your flight time should also be shorter. So kind of interesting. Swing time. And you mentioned that specifically. So the arms across. Swing. Yeah. Swing time was not associated with running economy.
But how are they defining swing time? Is it swing trajectory or swing time?
Just the time, the duration it takes for the arm to go forward and back. And it's interesting. I had heard exactly what you said, which is about this idea that arms should swing forward without a cross, right? And then I watched the Olympic trials. And you watch those 10K runners, you watch those 5K runners, and many of them,
sweet.
yeah, many of them go across their body. Tamara Jewett is one of my favorites to reference. And I talked to Tamara about this on the podcast when I had her as a guest. I said, Tamara, are you aware of how like you look when you run? Because you do not look like a pure runner and you are so astonishingly fast. And she said I wasn't the first one to tell her that.
I'm not surprised.
But,
Is there a difference between men and women on that? Because I tend to see that. I tend to see that swing across your body more with women than with men.
Yeah, I don't know. They didn't break it down, but men tend to have broader shoulders. You would think it would be men who would be swinging more, but yeah, I don't know. Interesting. I thought that was super interesting.
Yeah.
Ankle, knee, and hip angles. No matter what phase of so I always talk about how you raise the hips a little bit, raise the knees a little bit higher, right? Get that hip kind of flexed a little more. Bring that knee back on the, none of these things affect the knee economy. Now, they don't say whether or not they affect speed. They just talk about run. This is all about running economy. So I thought that was interesting. They looked at surface EMG activation of different muscles. So whether or not you recruited your glutes, certain muscles in the calf, certain muscles in the quads, none of them had any effect on running economy. So many people tend to be glute weak when they run, and that didn't matter. If they were glute strong when they ran,
Don't
also
say
didn't
that.
matter.
We're trying to get
I know.
Edit this part out, okay?
I know. This blew me away. And then the biggest thing that absolutely blew me away, didn't matter where you foot struck. Didn't matter if you're a heel striker, midfoot, or toe. Did not matter. Now, they went to great lengths to say foot strike is one of those things that may not matter for running economy, but does matter for injury risk.
I was waiting.
They were
for you to
very
pause
careful about that.
I was waiting for you to pause to bring this up because we're talking about run economy, but particularly when you think about age groupers, and in triathlon, if you're going to get hurt, it's probably going to be on the run, right? We need to, and the studies don't cover this, but we also need to consider with poor running mechanics, are our age groupers increasing the incidence of injury? And that's a totally different topic, and I understand that. So, I mean, I guess I'm going to stick to my sort of theory a little bit that if you're really striking with your heel and you're putting all that extra shock on your stride every single time your foot hits the ground, you might be increasing
but this is another
impact.
one of these things. This is another one of these things that cadence addresses too, right?
Yes,
I mean, when cadence is increased, you tend to force more. You tend to force more of a midfoot strike. So it's another one of those reasons to work on cadence. There was another study by Moore that I want to address here, which is titled, "Is There an Economical Running Technique? A Review of Modifiable Biomechanical Factors Affecting Running Economy." And in this paper, she talked about whether or not runners can alter their biomechanics and if it makes sense for coaches to focus on this because doing so improve running economy. And she looked at, there's these different kind of techniques that coaches will sometimes use. There's the pose technique, there's the chi technique, there's mid-distance to mid-distance, which is talking about looking at changing your stride length so that you change your foot strike area. She looked at these and found basically that none of them changed biomechanics appreciably, and none of them actually resulted in changes in running economy, which I thought was fascinating. And the people who push the pose technique are not going to want to hear this. She did, however, find that if people could change their normal stride length in any way, that shortening their stride length of 3% by 3% improves running economy dramatically. And I mean, how do you get someone to do that, right? The way you get someone to do that is improve their cadence.
Well,
it's all about cadence.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and also, just using myself as an example, I have extremely long legs, like 35, 36-inch inseam, right? And so the tendency is to overstride because I've got these big, long legs. But absolutely, if you think about cadence, you can shorten up, you absolutely can shorten up that stride, and you can improve where your foot does hit the ground, where all of those things. So cadence is such an easy one for age groupers to focus on. Even without technology, you can count how many times does your right foot hit the ground in 30 seconds, right? And
Yeah.
I mean, I do it all the time. You probably do the same thing when you run all the time. I mean, every few minutes, I'm sort of double checking. Am I on? For me,
So
it's 88 to 90, right?
I use the metronome function on the Garmin.
Okay. Oh,
and I
interesting. Okay.
continue to use it because I am really bad at running at a good cadence. I have never really gravitated like in cycling. I was able to train myself to spin at 90 and I just spin naturally now. But with running, I've never really been able to get myself to run at the right cadence without help. So I use the metronome function and I teach all my athletes to do it. And they've all had great success getting to a better cadence by using that function. And I encourage, if you don't know what I'm talking about, just I'll put a link in the show notes. But there's a Google video about how to use the metronome function. And I find it to be a very, very helpful tool. I just want to say also, Moore talks about in this paper how she says novice runners who are just beginning to run, they will kind of self-optimize a little bit. And so it's not as important with a beginner runner to kind of force some of these biomechanical changes. As they run more and more, they'll actually self-optimize. But a runner who has more experience, that runner needs more attention on these biomechanical things. And she emphasizes that. Another paper that I found fascinating, visual classification of running economy by distance running coaches. 5 runners were videotaped. The footage was reviewed by 121 endurance coaches at varying levels, and the coaches were asked to rank the 5 runners from poorest to best running economy and record notes on biomechanics. All over the place. None of the coaches were any good, no matter what level certification or how much effort or how much experience the coaches had. None of them were particularly good at being able to gauge which runners. Now, they were able to say, oh, this runner's a good runner, this runner's a novice runner, but they couldn't say which runners had the best running economy. And remember, running economy is kind of a nuance of running. It's not necessarily, like I said, I don't know what Lionel Sanders' running economy is. I just know that he's an amazing runner. He may have crappy running economy, but because only 10% of running economy is determined by biomechanics, just imagine how much faster he could be if his biomechanics were cleaned up. So it's just one contributor to running economy, and that's why I think coaches are not great at guesstimating runners running economy just by looking at them. But that doesn't mean that we can't help a runner become more economical by focusing on 2 things. And this is for all the coaches who might be listening: cadence, vertical oscillation. Those are the 2. That's kind of the take home of this whole segment.
And if you're an athlete listening, again, cadence is such an easy win. I mean, whether you want to do it with a metronome like Jeff talked about, or if you're like me and you just need a distraction every few minutes, and so you decide you're going to count stride because it gives you something to do on longer runs, you can see whether you're coming in. And it is sort of actually a fun guessing game, too. It's a little bit of a mind trick, right? Oh, I think I'm going to be at 88, or I think I'm going to be at 90, or whatever it is. And it's absolutely something you can play with over the course of a long run, over terrain, different pace indications if your coaches give you that. So it's kind of low-hanging fruit. I do the same thing, Jeff. When I see my athletes' files come in, I always am looking at their cadence and encouraging them to just a little bit quicker with the feet. Just think about this.
And if you want to see on a race file, if I want to know when an athlete's running into trouble, I just watch their cadence fall off.
Yeah.
As soon as their cadence falls off, I know that that's when they hit the wall. And it's not that cadence is so hard to maintain. It's just that that's the first piece of the form that's going to fall away is the cadence. And it's just an interest. I know that about myself too. I know that when it becomes harder to hold the cadence, I know that my pace is going to go. And
well, I remember at Kona last year, I went and supported a bunch of our athletes, and you and I both have a mutual friend who was slated to do very, very well at Kona. And I watched over the course of the marathon as her time on the ground and her cadence just fell through the floor. And I remember yelling at her, come on, cadence leads pace, cadence leads pace. And she says she can remember me saying that to her in the depths of the back end of that marathon. And of course, she didn't feel like she could do anything about it at the time. But it's a great thing to remember when you start to circle the drain is, okay, if I just focus on cadence, I bet I can bring my pace back up, just focusing on cadence. I mean, it's sort of similar to cycling to, I know that if I'm watching power numbers go down, if I really think about contact of my foot and cadence around the pedal stroke, like really being contacted to the pedals, it's going to bring the power back up. So it's sort of a similar visualization for
It's an
athletes out there
excellent
who think
point.
about
An
it.
excellent. That's what I focus on. If I feel my pace is dropping, I just get right in. I just zone in on that beeping of my watch, and I just hit the cadence, shorten the stride so that I can maintain the cadence, and the pace will come. And I do that too. The one last thing I want to say for athletes who are listening who may struggle with cadence, a lot of my athletes will start running at 60 per foot, and they're running at 120, and going from 120 to 180 is not easy. So I tell everybody to go slow. Go from 120 to 140 and then do that for a couple of weeks. And then from 140, you can go to 160. And you can do it over the course of several weeks to a couple of months. And before you know it, you're running at that at that cadence. And again, it doesn't have to be 90. It could be 85. And you want between 85 and 95 is ideal. And you'll get there. And then before you know it, it's going to feel normal. You just have to make the change over time and do it gradually, and you will get there. Well, this was a terrific conversation, and I hope insightful and very helpful for our athletes who are listening, and especially for coaches who might be listening as well. If you have a question for the medical mailbag, I hope that you will send it in. You know how to do so. You can send me an email at tri_doc@icloud.com, or you could drop it into the private Facebook group for the TriDoc podcast. Have a look for it on that platform. Answers the 3 questions. I will grant you admittance into that group if you're not already a member, and you could join the conversation there and submit your questions that we will consider for a future episode. Juliette, thanks so much for joining me once again for the medical mailbag. I look forward to our next conversation, and the countdown is on to when we are in person for Oregon.
I can't wait. I'll see you then.
My guest on the podcast today is the other half of the Endurance Icons podcast. I spoke with Jessica Cullen just a few episodes ago, and today I have Mark Cullen. Mark was a competitive hockey and soccer player who dabbled in cross country and track while growing up. He found a love for long distance running during his time in university and started coaching runners just after he completed his kinesiology degree in 2012. He got his start in triathlon in 2016 with the 70.3 in Muskoka in Ontario. And since that time, he's been a competitive age grouper, landing on numerous Ironman age group podiums and winning local running and triathlon races. Mark went full-time with his coaching business, which is Limitless Performance Endurance, in 2021. And his associated club has been growing from both a numbers and performance perspective ever since then. In 2024, Mark helped graduate 3 women into the pro Ironman field, including his aforementioned wife, a former guest of this podcast, Jessica Cullen, along with 2 others who we will talk about. And as I mentioned, he co-hosts the Endurance Icons podcast. We're going to talk about all of those things. But for now, Mark, welcome to the TriDoc podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. What a great intro. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, Mark, tell me about your journey to triathlon. I'm always interested in hearing how people come from a unisport focus and end up coming to multisport. So what was it that drew you to swim, bike, run, coming from a purely running background?
Yeah, I think initially, like, my love for endurance came from when my kind of hockey career ended. As a Canadian, you have hopes and dreams of making it to the highest level. And when that doesn't pan out, you're looking for something. I always loved, like, the health and fitness side of things. So finding something that I could do on my own time and be able to travel around the world and still compete at a high level is when I found running, essentially. And then did that for a number of years. And ever since seeing Simon Whitfield win the gold medal way back at Sydney Olympics there, I think I knew that I would do a triathlon and enjoy triathlon at some point. And then it was actually once I met Jess and we had both kind of got talking that we should maybe try triathlon at some point. Maybe we'll just try one and then we'll just go back to running from there. And then, yeah, it was 2016. We had a group of us who opted to do Muskoka. And right away, I just fell in love with the training, the variety of it, getting outdoors on my bike and being able to explore so many different kilometers and different cool cities and stuff like that. And then the challenge of swimming was really fun. It was just totally different where you couldn't just go harder to get better. You actually had to find new technique things. So I went from not being able to swim one length of the pool to being able to do a half Ironman swim in 34 minutes in my first one. So I think I just fell in love with the process and the so many different moving parts with it that I knew right away I was going to be all in on triathlon once I did my first one.
Share a similar background for swimming, as do so many age groupers. And the swim is often the biggest challenge. How did you reconcile really what needed to be done? Because I know for me, that process it's honestly continuing now, 20 something years into this. I continue to struggle with the swim. For us adult onset swimmers, it's a difficult process. What was your journey into the swim? How have you managed 34 minutes is a very respectable first swim. So how did you deal with all that?
Yeah, the funny thing is I'm frustrated with the fact now that the swim is technically probably my best discipline of the three, because I'm down to, I can swim about 27 for 70.3 now. So I'm like on the heels of collegiate swimmers. So I want to show people that even if you didn't come from a swim background, if you do the right things and find your kind of learning method of the swim, that you can get down below 30 minutes, I think, for lots of people if they're willing to invest the time and do it. But some things that really helped me, I found, is I'm definitely a visual learner. So I was one who just immersed myself in loads of different YouTube videos. And I was just watching over and over a really good form of swimmers in YouTube videos. And for myself, I was able to apply that in the water and just ingrain that in my head and do certain things to allow myself to start to mimic some of that really good form. And right away, that dropped me from that 34 to 31 pretty quickly. Also, joining a local master's swim group and having somebody to actually look at my form day in, day out it was only once a week we were doing it, but things like that of seeing yourself swim as well, getting video done and having a coach on deck, those two things just shot me forward so quickly that I think those were my main keys to success is just, being a visual learner, those YouTube videos, seeing myself swim and then being able to put that together. And then obviously building the fitness side of things is being willing to invest 3 to 4 swims a week and getting up in that 10 to 12K a week range. Again, that's what allowed me to make that next step. And I got very good at pulling with paddles because that was essentially what I found an age group 70.3 or Ironman swim is you're in the wetsuit. You don't need tons of kick propulsion. If you can become a really good swimmer with pull buoy and paddles, that really applied well for me. Once I got into the race, I could swim very fast with little effort and get out feeling like I did nothing. And that's what expedited my swim improvements over the last few years.
I want to unpack some of those things because you've touched on a few things that I myself have preached to my athletes, but also things that I've struggled with a lot. I get video from almost all my athletes. I get video of myself. And I have said over and over again that our proprioception, our ability to understand our body's position in space is much better on land than it is in water. We all have this impression of what our body is doing in the water. And then when we see video, we often are realizing how completely unrealistic our internal visuals are. And you are saying that you've been able to watch these videos and somehow able to almost mimic what you see. And I know that many of my athletes, me over the years, I spend so much time watching these videos and I think in my head, I'm doing exactly what I see. And then of course, someone will take some video of me and I'm like, oh my goodness, who the hell is that person in the water? So what do you think is that you're doing that none of us are able to do? What is the disconnect that you are somehow able to mimic and actually get the visual in your mind to meet what's actually happening? Because I got to say, most of us are having a lot of trouble doing that.
Yeah, maybe it's just a gift I was luckily born with. But it's also like to go with that. There was certain pieces once I saw myself swimming in videos and things like that. I also was able to customize some of those key drills so I could actually feel what I was doing and get the right activation points as well. So whether that's for myself, I wasn't rotating very well. I wasn't getting a good initial catch position. So some of the ones I started putting in there with single arm opposite breath drill where you're just using the one arm, breathing on the opposite side. And I had a lot of success with that of making sure that I was isolating one arm, getting a good catch position there, but also rotating to both sides because I'm somebody who usually just breathes on the right. This allowed me to balance out a bunch of my rotation. So some of these drills really helped me take that visual and start to actually feel it in ways, which I think is a really important one for people to start to slow things down and actually take time to get in a good position. I feel like like the common thing, I'm sure you see it with lots of your swimmers, but they get in there and they're like, I just need to get my continuous 2000. And it's like, you got to be willing to have in the early phase, blow it down for a couple sessions and have a few where it's just, you were going so slow through the water, doing sculling, doing some customized drills that are working on your specific weaknesses. And then what that does is just expedite that process of getting that good catch position, making sure the shoulder, elbow, wrist is in that like downstream motion. So you're not just like dropping the elbow and losing all that propulsion. So I think if people are actually willing to see the video, have customized drills, slow things down for a couple and spend some time on things that actually are going to improve their specific form, that they can really start to ingrain that and then put it into practice in some of their easy swimming, or when they're doing pull and they don't have to worry about kicking like crazy and their heart rate and breathing getting out of control. They can focus on these things and slow things down. And I think that could be a good way of applying some of that like visual that they have to actual like feeling it in practice, because everybody's going to learn and it's going to click for them a little bit different from what I've seen in swimming.
Yeah, there's no question swimming is so technical, and focusing on a lot of like just breaking down the stroke into little bits and really focusing on little bits of technique and hammering that for weeks, even sometimes until it really gets honed in is so important. I just think for me, it's taken much, much longer to do that. Mm-hmm. You're very lucky in that it's come quickly to you. And I think you sound like someone who, if you had started swimming as a kid, you probably would have been a very fast swimmer as a kid, and it would have benefited you even more. The other thing you mentioned was master swimming. I know many people who do master swimming and benefit from it immensely. I have just not been able to, simply because of my schedule. My schedule's all over the place. It's hard for me to do. And most people who talk to me about master swimming, though, feel like they get more out of it just because it pushes them. They swim with other swimmers who are more adept than they are. And just being in the water with other swimmers who are faster than them, it motivates them to work harder. And that improves their fitness and makes them swim. You, however, said something about the coach on the deck actually giving you feedback. And that is not something that most masters coaches seem to be willing to do with newer triathletes. And I think that's something you were very lucky. You obviously have a master's coach who is willing to do that. And I hesitate to make a universal sort of statement, but my experience and what I've heard from others is that does not seem to be the norm.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I've had ones before that weren't very good, and that's honestly why I wasn't doing masters, but I had heard some good feedback from a few people who had swam with this coach. And he's actually, the funny thing is he's still in university here. He's the captain of the university swim team here, but he's just super social guy that loves to help people out. And when you combine with the masters, him giving you feedback, you get a 90-minute session where you don't have to deal with the crazy complexities of a public lane swim, which we all have heard the disaster stories there. Some people to push you. So sometimes I go in the fast lane with the former collegiate swimmers if it's a certain workout that allows me to stay within reach when it's not an IM workout and I'm just going to get totally destroyed. I feel like when you put those together, it's just, expedites your process so quickly. And then you're just always getting in like a 4,000 meter swim, and it doesn't feel bad because you're with the group. So it's just that power of community there. But I totally agree with you. You got to find the right master's coach. Or if your coach isn't giving any feedback, make sure you ask them and keep hitting on them. Like if that's something they're advertising as part of it and a key element of it, like push your coach to make sure they're giving you feedback. Don't go find a new program, is my opinion, because that's what you're paying the premium for. So may as well take advantage of it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And the last thing you highlighted, and this is the thing that I have said for a long time, which is just swimming more, like doing more volume. Because even if your technique isn't great, if you do more volume, you're going to gain more fitness with your poor technique. And just getting out of the water with a lower heart rate, without being fatigued, without burning as many calories because you're more fit, is going to pay dividends. And so I, like you, tell all my athletes, I think swimming more. Not everybody can afford the time to swim 10 to 12K a week, but I have all my athletes swim anywhere between 9 and 10 if they're doing half Ironmans. If they're doing fulls, it's more. And I feel like they have all benefited from that. And it's a hard sell for a lot of athletes. I don't know if you find the same thing, because so many triathletes come to triathlon as non-swimmers or not thrilled with swimming. They view it much like I do still, as it's the thing you have to do to get to your bike. But I try to encourage them to see it as really the linchpin to their day, that having a good swim, feeling good getting out of the water is going to really catapult them to a much better performance overall.
Totally agree. I feel like there's that whole downstream effect that people are not giving enough credit to in a race. Like if you just tax yourself in that swim and you're in there extra long and you may be an incredible bike runner, but what percentage did you just hack off of both of those by wasting extra time in there? I think people really underestimate the swim. And I think what I've really noticed with a lot of my athletes is there's this swim threshold of enjoyment. If you start to put in enough time, you start to feel a lot better in the water. You start to see improvements, and then people actually start to really enjoy swimming. And then it's not this, oh, I need to drag myself to the pool. If you can have this momentum where you're swimming a couple days a week and you want to go there, first of all, because you're making improvements, and then you have one masters in your week, swimming doesn't become a drag. And before you know it, you're swimming 12K a week. And you're like, wow, I'm actually enjoying swimming now. So there is this threshold spot that people cross over where they go from swim being a drag, and then there's just this click and they're like, oh, I actually really the process of trying to get better at swimming. And then, yeah, it's just downstream. Their races are so much better.
100%. It's a tipping point, like you're describing. It's absolutely a tipping point. And getting to that tipping point can be hard because if you're an adult onset swimmer, I had to, unlike you, I didn't come from even a running back. I just came from hockey. So for me, running, biking was all new. So was swimming. And you make improvements in running and biking much more quickly. So easier to gravitate to those. And swimming can be really tough. Like I think it was a full year before I was able to swim 1500. And that day when I could swim 1500 uninterrupted, I was so excited. It was like a really big breakthrough moment for me. And I just know that for my athletes, I completely understand why it takes a while to get to that tipping point. And it's a hard sell as a coach, but I'm like you, I'm constantly hammering that home of the importance of embracing the fact that this is not duathlon, it's triathlon. So we have to incorporate, even though the swim is the shortest part of your day, it really does require a more significant part of your training volume time-wise than you might otherwise expect. So just thinking about your swim views, I'm interested in what your overall coaching philosophy is, because you've obviously had great success. You've had 3 women get to the professional ranks in Ironman racing. What has been your overarching philosophy in coaching athletes, and how have you had that kind of success? Obviously, the athletes have something to do with it, but still, the coach has a lot to do with it as well.
Yeah, I think when I think about my coaching philosophy, I'm definitely not the super risky or fad sort of coach. I want people to really get down to nailing the essentials of things. So whether that's actually sticking to your training paces and being super consistent, having good nutritional habits before, during, after workouts, focusing on recovery. And once you're a healthy athlete, you just put so much momentum on your side, and it's just this snowball that keeps rolling and rolling. So I'm not the coach who's going to be taking tons of risks out there. And then especially with my one-on-one athletes, I'm definitely really try to customize things of learning in the early phases with them, where is their strength. Every athlete is coming to me from a different spot. Tons of former collegiate athletes or competitive sports players who all of these very steep power curves when they come to me, and they can just crush those short reps, but then they just fall off a quick cliff quickly when it comes to all of the aerobic stuff. So I think it's really learning across those 3 disciplines what kind of their strengths are there, and then really tailoring sort of a program around that to make sure that they're actually going to grow with what they need. And we do have a performance sort of more general plan with our club as well, which helps a bunch of people get results as well, just from the tried and true sort of key things of building a good aerobic base with some intensity in there. But yeah, with my one-on-one athlete, I take it another step further of making sure they're taking care of all of the pillars of performance, and then really customizing it to what they're after, and realizing this is for most of the people, even my pros, they all have full-time jobs. None of them are doing it full-time. That you need to have more in life than just triathlon. And once you're enjoying life and you're integrating into your life and it's not butting up against your work, your family, and you're working it all together, again, it's just another addition to that snowball of improving and enjoying things and wanting to take a long-term approach to things. And if somebody's coming to me and they're like, hey, I want to do a race in 3 months. Can I work with you one-on-one? I'm like, I'm not even going to be able to do anything significant in this time. So let's play the long game, commit to it for a year. I don't think you'll be disappointed once you do things the right way and be patient. And then you're just going to set yourself up for a passion that you're going to enjoy for many more years to come. From the community side of things and the fitness side of things, it's just this amazing thing if you give it the time to be that and are willing to invest and do it the right way. So that's the long story of many of the elements that go into it. It's definitely not a simple answer.
No, it's nuanced. I like that. Now, I got the sense in talking to Jess that you recognized her potential before she did. Is that an accurate assessment?
Yeah, for sure. I could see in the early part, like she had gone right to really long ultra distance stuff right away. So she had no real sport background growing up. And I could just see from her ultra stuff that she had like a serious grit and mindset that you could go from no sport, no pushing yourself really growing up to like now you're cranking 100-mile like ultra races. Like there's something special in there. So it was one of those, I was doing shorter stuff, she was doing longer stuff. We found a way to meet in the middle, and you could tell she just loved the process, was willing to do all of the things around it from the nutrition side and the recovery. And the second she started doing that stuff, and she wanted variety. So something like triathlon was perfect, where she wants to go in a bunch of different directions, but you can do that within the same sport and move in the right direction. So once she found that, I knew she was going to be amazing right away. And then you could see from her first Ironman when she went blowing by me at 35K into the run in Lake Placid that she was just built for like the mid to long distance sort of Ironman type of stuff and just gets better as the day goes along. So I could see the potential right away. And for somebody who, up till didn't even start activity in her 20s can get to the level of being a professional triathlete at whatever, 34. And we didn't do anything drastic in the years. Like it's pretty cool. Yeah. I definitely saw it early and feel like she still has such a crazy runway ahead of her. So it's been a fun journey so far.
So what is it like coaching your spouse? I mean, that I am in the same profession as my spouse, and it's interesting. Doctors, there's sort of this common thing among doctors. You either marry another person in the medical profession or you marry someone who does 180 degrees different, because either you want someone with whom you share this, you have this understanding of everything that you do, or you want someone who has no understanding because you just don't want to bring it home with you. So you are now not only invested in your triathlon journey with your spouse, but you're coaching your spouse. So how's that been going?
Yeah, I think we struggle with it more in the early phase of our career working together. Is she actually had a different coach when we first started dating, and I wasn't at a spot where I maybe felt comfortable coaching her just because she got to a pretty high level quickly. And as I was growing as a coach, I was just going to let it be and let her come to me whenever she felt like she wanted me to coach her. And I think she started to see as I was working with athletes that my approach obviously resonated with her. Like we're together, so we have similar beliefs and things. But in the early phase, I think it was realizing that I don't think the caps, if you want to call it, of the husband cap and the coach cap were, separated well enough. So there would be times where like I'm giving her coaching feedback, but it's like an attack on our relationship. But that was the early phase of it. And I think once we actually got down to the fact that she knows I'm not attacking my love for her in the end, but like legitimately, and I can preface things better now. Okay, this is the coaching hat. I'm going to give you some feedback on this. But no, I still love you dearly on this. Once we got to that part, then she has the biggest advantage ever. You have a coach who can see you as you get up in the morning. And if you're hobbling out of bed and you have a little hitch in your stride, or you're getting a little moody because you're like under fueling on the day, like you have this built-in accountability system who can see you. Now, especially we both work from home like 24/7. Like what an advantage to have somebody who can like step back from like your emotions and be like, okay, are you doing the right things to push yourself forward? So I think once you get over the initial stage of it, she has like the best advantage in being able to live with her coach, and her coach be able to see her every day and give her little tweaks on the fly to make sure she's not doing too much, or the days where like she clearly has extra energy, like now's the day to do a little extra because we can absorb it.
Well, you see, that's the best answer because you gave me both sides. You gave me the positives and the negatives together. And I want to focus on the negatives just a little bit because let's face it, conflict is really what makes the most drama and makes the most entertainment. Let's face it. I mean, there are times, when we're coaching age groupers, the hardest we're ever going to go on our athletes is, hey, you missed a workout today. I think you really need to do that, right? But I mean, with a professional, you're going to have to hold their feet to the fire just a little bit more. And when that professional happens to be your wife and your wife is having a bad day because of who knows what, that could probably expose and fray some nerves and lead to some difficult conversations. So you've got to balance a lot of eggs at the same time. And she's done very well. Listen, I've spoken with her. I could see how easygoing she is, and she's got a wonderful disposition. So obviously she's probably not very prickly. So it's probably a little bit easier with her. But still, there's going to be times when you're going to have to just be like, hey, I need you to do X, Y, Z. And how have you managed those conversations and yet not run into those kinds of conflicts that most of us as husband and wife might potentially run into?
Yeah, I mean, we still have our moments where we're like butting up against things, but I think in the end, like you said, Jess isn't an overly prickly person at all. She's one of the most positive people I know. And she's also just like a serial learner and wants to continue to improve at things. So it makes it easy on my side. There's going to be the initial moment where I'm giving her some feedback on something, and it never feels good to get attacked on something and be like, but she's very good at like right away having the awareness that like, oh man, that sucks, but all right, I'm going to own this and realize that I need to improve on this. Or if she feels like it's something that maybe I'm not giving her the correct feedback on, her that she feels like she is doing a good job on that, we can have an open conversation on it without it turning into a massive fight or blowing up our relationship. We're the relationship that if we have a fight on something, probably 20 minutes later, once we cool off, we can both just totally own what we did and be able to come back and just be good again. So I think that one of the best telltale signs of a good, mature person and athlete is how quickly they can come back to that neutral level, versus if you have an athlete that you butt up against and they don't want to talk to you for a week. It's that you probably need to work on the tools in your toolbox to be able to take feedback a little bit better and have an honest conversation if you truly want to get better at something. So yeah, it just makes it easy from that side of like, we're going to have times where we butt up against things, but she's willing to come back to that neutral level and have a legit conversation about what are the ways we can improve this if it indeed needs to be improved. So that's where we come from. And yeah, there's going to be the odd little blow up, but we figured a good process to work through those problems.
That's great. So you've mentioned that you think she has a big runway ahead of her. So this is obviously not a 1-year project. She and you have notions of continuing this for a little while. What do you think? Is her focus going to be 70.3? I know she's doing Ironman Lake Placid next month. Not that many pros that can really do both distances, and she's raced quite a bit. It's impressive how often she's raced. What do you sort of envision as a sort of a career trajectory for her?
Yeah, so she will naturally say, just because she came from that long distance background, that Ironman is her strength. And hey, the results don't lie when it comes to that. Even if you look at her Pro Series race this year, she's done 4 races, 3 70.3s and a full distance Ironman. And her best, like relative, she was almost the same distance back from the leader in the full distance that she's been in 70.3s. So there's something to be said, but also like the training I've been doing with her has been more targeted at Ironman distance, just because we know that's where her passion lies, that's where her strength is, and we have some big goals with that stuff. So I think it's one of those, I would love for her to maybe at some point be able to dedicate a bit of a block to 70.3 stuff, because I think she actually could do quite well across that. But really our focus with all of my pros is none of them are coming from a very strong swim background. They all have full-time jobs. So again, the swimming part is relatively their weakness in all of them. So we're really just working so much on swim and bike focus to get her into the races more so. Because when it comes down to the run, like she can run with the best of them, like maybe not the top level pros, but she's running. If say there's 25 pros in a race, she can have the 10th best run in a race and be solid there. But it's just the gap in the swim and the bike is so big at that point that we're just investing so much time with all of my pros in the swim and bike to get them in the race, because you can't deny that in these Ironman races, even with Race Ranger and that 12-meter draft zone, if you're in it with those packs, the packs just keep the pace on. People are slingshotting a bit when they get in those draft spots, and there is benefit the speeds they're going at 12 meters. So you got to be in the race after that swim in those bike packs to really have a chance to mix it up and get in some of those top 10s, and then have the chance to maybe be able to go to a 70.3 or an Ironman world champ as a pro. But until you get in those bike packs, you can't run yourself down those gaps. So that's really where our focus lies.
We've seen that, right? On both the men and women's side. I mean, you've mentioned Ironman and Mont Tremblant. We're recording this just a couple of days after that race, and we saw with Tamara do it once again. Tamara with just a sensational run. And I've spoken with her on this program, and she worked so hard on her bike, and it shows, right? I mean, she comes off the bike in 7th and is able to run her way up into 2nd. So she's able to keep that gap manageable for her, not manageable for most, but just because she's such a sensational runner. Her issue remains the swim, although she didn't come out of the water it was a shortened swim, so she didn't come out of the water. It was too much of a gap. Yeah. But she continues to have some issues with the bike, because coming 7 minutes down from Paul Finley, even she can't make that up. It's too hard on a half. But Lionel has just done amazing things with his swim, and just from pure force of will and just working so hard on his swim. And now he's coming out in striking distance, and with how strong he is on the bike and as just a terrific runner, he's going to be very hard to beat at any distance. And it just goes to show that your strategy with your pros is obviously the one that needs to be emphasized.
I'm so interested to see how Lionel does in a really big race where there is a front pack that could get away a little bit more. Even that 2 or 3 minutes, he's coming back on a 70.3. If he's in, say, like a T100 race where it's a pack of 8 of them, they're going to be so motivated to stay away from a guy like that, and they have the bike power to ride every bit as close to him. I wonder if he can even close the gap on some of that. We haven't seen him in a big race with a big front pack that gets out of the swim.
Oceanside, he came out very close to the leaders in the swim, and that was really what I was thinking about, is how he's really worked on his swim, that he was able to come out in Oceanside so close to the leaders. Sam Long is the one who's in trouble, because Sam is a great biker runner, but his swim is significantly worse than Lionel's. Jackson still swims well, but he's also coming out at a big deficit. But again, a very strong biker, doesn't have quite the run that Lionel does, but always gets himself into contention. So it's really interesting to see the dynamics play, but the swim continues to be of the utmost importance as we see more and more of these short course guys who are coming with these crazy fast swims move up to the longer distance and maintain their crazy fast swims. It's really interesting. I want to finish. I'm
so excited to see 70.3 Worlds this year. I think it's going to be a cracker of a race. Very excited for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So just want to take just a couple of minutes we have left just to give you a chance to talk a little bit about the Endurance Icons podcast. How's things going with that show? Tell us a little bit about it and what people can expect if they browse over to find it in their podcast listening service.
Endurance Icons, we cover everything from bringing a number of athletes on in there, as well as the kind of experts in the field as well. So last year we were really good about getting a podcast out every single week, and we had people across the whole endurance world, everything from professional cyclists from Canada, Alison Jackson. She was an amazing guest. I think our most listened to episode is Lucy Bartholomew, the Australian ultra runner. And then we had tons of awesome triathletes on there as well. Marathon runners, you name it, we've covered across, even adventure racers across all the endurance world. So I think there's been amazing takeaways from a lot of those episodes that people of any ability level can really resonate with and take something away to help improve their mindset or their training or their nutrition or recovery. So there's been so much that we've learned and been able to improve from our end. So that part's been amazing. And mostly they're just amazing people as well. And then this year we got a few more experts on. So we had an awesome sleep expert on there a month or so ago that kind of debunked a lot of the myths around some of the sleep stuff that you hear out there around some of the supplements and things like that, and got it back to the root of what's truly important for an athlete. So we've had lots of great takeaways from some of those as well. And then this year we've also had ones that have been really well received in terms of our pros coming on and really getting in depth, talking about some of their race recaps and what it's like to be a mid-pack pro and how does it play out and what the whole dynamic like when you go to a pro briefing and stuff like that. So those are different types of ones we have on there, and we're always open to having new guests on or more people give us ideas of things they want to hear, and we'll bring experts on. Or sometimes it's just a podcast where we have a bunch of questions pooled up for myself and I'll do a coach's sort of episode and just talk about a bunch of things people are curious about. So a wide ranging things, but we're having tons of fun with it. So definitely pop over there. You can find us on like Instagram, or we're on Spotify, and we put the episodes on YouTube as well.
That's great. Yeah, and I've enjoyed listening to several of those episodes, and you guys do a great job with it. Well, Mark, it's been a real pleasure talking with you. I appreciate you taking some time to come on and discuss your coaching, everything going on with Jess's career, and with your own successes as an age grouper as well. Will you be racing in Lake Placid, or will you just be there coaching?
I'm just there for support crew. I'm going back to my roots and doing Muskoka in 2 weeks. So I finally had a good comeback race last weekend. I had a rough one in Texas, good Olympic distance in Tremblant last weekend. So I'm feeling optimistic for a good race in Muskoka in a couple weeks. So just getting tuned up for that.
Excellent. Well, we'll be watching and pulling for you to have a good day there, and wishing you the
pressure's on.
Well, Mark Cullen, thanks again for being here. Mark is a coach with Limitless Performance. He's the co-host with his wife, Jess, of the Endurance Icons podcast. I'll put links to all of these things in the show notes where you can find Mark and all of his endeavors. Mark Cullen, again, thank you for joining me on the TriDoc podcast today. It's been a fun conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Adamson, and I am a proud Patreon supporter of the TriDoc podcast. The TriDoc podcast is produced and edited by Jeff Sankoff, along with his amazing interns Cosette Rhodes and Nina Takashima. You can find the show notes for everything discussed on the show today, as well as archives of previous episodes at www.tridocpodcast.com. Do you have a question about any of the issues discussed on this episode? Or do you have a question for consideration to be answered on a future episode? Send Jeff an email at try_doc@icloud.com. If you are interested in coaching services, please visit try.coaching.com or lifesportcoaching.com, where you will find a lot of information about Jeff and the services that he provides. You can also follow Jeff on the TriDoc Podcast Facebook page, TriDoc Coaching on Instagram, and the TriDoc Coaching YouTube channel. And don't forget to join the TriDoc Podcast private Facebook group. Search for it and request to join today. If you enjoy this podcast, I hope that you will consider leaving a rating and a review, as well as subscribe to the show wherever you download it. And of course, there's always the option of becoming a supporter of the podcast at patreon.com/TriDocPodcast. The music heard at the beginning and the end of the show is Radio by Empty Hours and is used with permission. This song and many others like it can be found at www.reverbnation.com, where I hope that you will visit and give small independent bands a chance. The TriDoc podcast will be back again soon with another medical question and answer and another interview with someone in the world of multisport. Until then, train hard, train healthy.